Now I'll call upon Srimati Karuna, who's the director of the Gandhi Memorial Center in Washington, D.C. Just a short intro that she's a full-time minister for Self-Revelation Church of Absolute Monism. She plays an active role in promoting the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and cultural heritage of India. I call upon Srimati Karuna for the special address. Please, ma'am.
Namaskar. I'm very grateful to be here with you this morning. And for many of you traveling to the US for the first time, I'm thinking, of course, after having heard many of your introductions in your, I won't say career, but vocation as journalists. In, I believe it was 2011, on a trip to India, I had gone to Ahmedabad to visit Gujarat Vidyapith. And there was a group that invited me to speak at a workshop near the campus. It was an organization called Indian Society for Community Education. And they had a group of master's students from Gujarat Vidyapith who were journalism students. And they asked me to come and speak to this group of journalism students on Mahatma Gandhi. And I have to admit, I felt a little out of place landing from America in India in the institution, the university founded by Mahatma Gandhi, Gujarat Vidyapith, to speak to students there about Gandhi. And I think in a lot of ways, my sincere heart was more than to speak of the Gandhian ideals, but to speak of the ideals that these young people would be able to hold as a light in the darkness as aspiring journalists. So sitting here and listening to your dedication and work and years of service, I think back to that group of young students and wonder where they are today. For me, it's such a personal connection and association to draw, not just from the message and life of Mahatma Gandhi, but that ideal that he sought. You all are so familiar with Gandhiji's ideals, the pursuit of truth, of calling upon fellow satyagrahis to hold firmly to truth above all else. And I think of you as journalists having that life unfold before you in good times and in bad, no matter what the challenge, to always hold a light to truth. As director of the Gandhi Memorial Center here in Washington, D.C., I've had a great blessing to be able to share within this wider Washington, D.C. community and beyond some of the life and message of Mahatma Gandhi through my service to the Gandhi Center. You've heard a little bit about the years that have passed since its founding, but perhaps are not familiar with how it came to be. Well, it was actually a young man in 1928. At the time, he was known as Brahmachari Jyotin, and he arrived in Washington, D.C. Think of that. 1928, almost 20 years before India's independence, arriving right at the beginning of the Great Depression, long before the civil rights movement in this country, coming from Bengal to Washington, D.C. You can only imagine what he might have encountered. He came at the request of his guru, Swami Yogananda Paramahansa, to come and share the philosophy and ideal of Advaita Vedanta and Kriya Yoga. So here's this young man. He was born in 1903. So he was about 25 years old when he landed in Washington, D.C. Coming with just a small bag and staying for a time around 18th and Columbia Street, just to share India's spiritual heritage. Well, over the years, it became possible for him, for Brahmachari Jotin, who later became known as Swami Premananda Giri, to establish a place on Western Avenue, just on the border of Northwest DC and Bethesda, Maryland. And of course, his ideal and his pursuit was to share a philosophy of universality, an ideal of peace. And over the years, it became possible for him to shed light on the ideals which he was watching from a distance. What was happening in India in the 20s and 30s and 40s. By 1959, Swami Premananda incorporated the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Foundation here in Washington, D.C. 1959. At that time, it was just a seed, an idea from which would grow what would become later a space and a place to house the foundation in the Gandhi Memorial Center. That came not until the 70s. And in fact, in January 1976, Swami Premananda, as the founder of the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Foundation, and my predecessor, Srimati Karuna, and the then Indian ambassador, T.N. Kaul, dedicated the Gandhi Memorial Center for service to present the life and teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and the spiritual and cultural heritage that nourished Gandhiji. Well, perhaps it gives away a little bit about my age, but I was born in January 1976. And it wasn't until 1998 that I arrived at the entrance to the Gandhi Memorial Center. And all the years since, I've thought we were destined to be together. I came to the Gandhi Memorial Center as a graduate student myself, studying international peace and conflict resolution. And would you believe, to that point, I still had not read any of Gandhiji's writings. But that soon changed. And my pursuit of study of the philosophy that inspired Gandhiji continues to grow today. In fact, I read some of the same writings of Gandhiji over and over and over, and every day they bring new meaning to me. Of course, the Gandhi Memorial Center has a mission larger than its humble accommodations. An ideal that will only continue to grow in need and in fulfillment in successive generations on this globe. But I want to share with you something. Perhaps you have read this at some point, perhaps not, but it is Sometimes I actually get a little choked up reading it. I get a little emotional because the words are so powerfully, eloquently, beautifully descriptive of the voice of the Mahatma. These words, which I will read to you now, come from Jawaharlal Nehru in a publication on the spirit of India, in which he describes the Mahatma. And he wrote, "This little man of poor physique had something of steel in him, something rock-like, which did not yield to physical powers, however great they might be. And in spite of his unimpressive features, his loincloth and bare body, there was a royalty and a kingliness in him, which compelled a willing obeisance from others. Consciously and deliberately meek and humble, yet he was full of power and authority, and he knew it. And at times he was imperious enough, issuing commands which had to be obeyed. His calm, deep eyes would hold one and gently probe into the depths. His voice, clear and limpid, would purr its way into the heart and evoke an emotional response. Whether his audience consisted of one person or 1,000, the charm and magnetism of the man passed on to it, and each one had a feeling of communion with the speaker. This feeling had little to do with the mind, though the appeal to the mind was not wholly ignored, but mind and reason definitely had second place. This process of spellbinding was not brought about by oratory or the hypnotism of silken phrases. The language was always simple and to the point, and seldom was an unnecessary word used. It was the utter sincerity of the man and his personality that gripped. He gave the impression of tremendous inner reserves of power. And one of the most remarkable things about Gandhiji was his capacity to win over, or at least to disarm, his opponents. In his own way, he had discovered the art of living and had made of his life an artistic whole. Every gesture had meaning and grace, without a false touch. There were no rough edges or sharp corners about him, no trace of vulgarity. Having found an inner peace, he radiated it to others and marched through life's tortuous ways with firm and undaunted step. Gandhiji had pleaded for the adoption of the way of nonviolence, with all the eloquence and persuasive power which he so abundantly possessed. His language had been simple and unadorned. His voice and appearance cool and clear and devoid of all emotion. But behind that outward covering of ice, there was the heat of a blazing fire and concentrated passion. And the words he uttered winged their way to the innermost recesses of our minds and hearts and created a strange ferment there. The way he pointed out was hard and difficult, but it was a brave path, and it seemed to lead to the promised land of freedom. Courage is the one sure foundation of character, he had said. Without courage, there is no morality, no religion, no love. One cannot follow truth or love so long as one is subject to fear. Those words of Nehru about Gandhiji, with such great passion and compassion both, remind me every time I read those words the effect of the voice of truth. Gandhiji was no stranger to the difficulty to raise even a meek voice. And perhaps you are familiar with this expression from Gandhiji. So true, perhaps at his time, certainly in ours. Gandhiji said, "It is because we have at the moment everybody claiming the right of conscience without going through any discipline whatsoever. And there is so much untruth being delivered to a bewildered world. But all that I can in true humility present to you is that truth is not to be found by anybody who has not got an abundant sense of humility." That line, those words, that there is so much untruth being delivered to a bewildered world. These days we look not just to our fellow human beings, but from the technology that serves us. And we don't always know the unreal from the real. You know, the very power of wisdom to discern truth, to have that purity of consciousness, to have that sense of humility, to have that power to discern the unreal from the real. It reminds me of the beautiful expression from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Asato ma satagamaya, tamasho ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritamgamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. Perhaps in my heart and my mind, that is one of the most powerful expressions that Gandhiji attempted to live. To be a satyagrahi, to hold firmly to truth, no matter what. To have the courage to be fearless in the face of untruth. Some of you probably are familiar that when Gandhiji established Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, he shared with his fellow ashram members the intention of the placement of that ashram. But in one direction, those who would be living on the ashram grounds would see the cremation grounds. And in the other direction, they would see the prison. And Gandhiji said, in order to be a satyagrahi, one must not fear death or prison. A rather bold statement, and perhaps a little intimidating for those who would choose to follow this path. But again, Gandhiji also often referenced the verse from the Katha Upanishad that we know even in the West from the author Somerset Maugham, the razor's edge. That the path of truth is sharp and narrow, and sharp as a razor's edge. And Gandhiji said, I weep when I slip. I weep when I slip, but I continue to walk that path. To have such a steadfast commitment and self-dedication. Gandhiji said, I am striving and pining all these years to achieve moksha, self-liberation. And then, you know, the motto of the university he established at Gujarat Vidyapith in 1920, Sa Vidyaya Muktaye. Knowledge is that which liberates. As journalists, that is what you are called to do. To liberate through knowledge of the truth. Thank you.